John Arthur Bowen goes back to the house of his massa, Anna Maria Brodew Thornton, and he's captured and then he's put in jail. That weekend, a crowd of angry young white men gathered around the city jail in Judiciary Square. They're mostly Irish and they're mostly drunk. They're known as the mechanics. These manual laborers were poor and insecure. The institution of slavery, with its low-cost labor for well-to-do whites, constantly undercut the value of their work. But they did not direct their rage at the slave masters. Instead, they turned on the Negroes and the Abolitionists, seeing them as dire threats to be repelled. Watching the tumult in Judiciary Square was a free Negro named Michael Shiner, who worked for the Navy and kept a diary. The mechanics, he wrote, swore they would pull the jail down, and they continued making their threats, and they said their object was to get Anna Maria Brodew Thornton's mulatto and hang him without judge or jury. A lynch mob, a white lynch mob. So the white lynch mob is at the jail causing all this havoc, and they're cussing. And old Francis Scott Key, he didn't know what to do. So old Frank Key, he calls his 10 constables who are under his domains. These constables were slave catchers. And the Marines to restore order to Washington, D.C. The Marines marched down Pennsylvania Avenue toward Judiciary Square carrying bayoneted guns. And for that night, things calmed down. Old Frank Key apparently thought he had to do more. He shared the Globe's view that John Arthur Bowen's alleged attack was the first fruit of the circulation of abolitionist literature. The city's legally sanctioned slave trade did not stir Francis Scott Key to action, no. He was far more offended by the outside agitators from the North who had sought to abolish it. So on August 10th, 1835, Francis Scott Key persuaded a justice of the peace to write a warrant, an illegal warrant, for the arrest of Dr. Reuben Crandall, a white man who was said to be in possession of abolitionist literature. Dr. Reuben Crandall was a 29-year-old botanist and doctor from New York who had recently opened an office on the High Street, now Wisconsin Avenue, in Georgetown. Crandall was a plausible suspect because of his notorious sister, Prudence Crandall. She was a Connecticut schoolteacher who had stirred controversy nationwide the year before by welcoming a free Negro girl into her classroom. The Connecticut legislature promptly passed a law forbidding integrated schools. So, good job, Connecticut. Reuben Crandall opposed slavery, but not openly. In fact, he actually cared more about the prohibition of liquor than the abolition of slavery. When 3 constables went to Dr. Reuben Crandall's office, Reuben Crandall allowed them in to search the premises. As they later testified in court, the constables found a box full of copies of the Anti-Slavery Reporter and the Liberator. That'd be William Lloyd Garrison's The Liberator, the 2 publications that had been mass mailed to the city's leading citizens. And that hadn't been done before. Oh my God, look at all these newspapers saying slavery is wrong. Reuben Crandall was arrested on the charges of sedition. As the constables emerged on the street with their prisoner, one bystander later testified as someone in the crowd said, "We ought to take the damned rascal and hang him up on one of our trees." So the lynch mob wanted to lynch John Arthur Bowen, couldn't do it. Now they want to lynch Dr. Reuben Crandall because Francis Scott Key, the author of the national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner, said that he was a bad guy. And he arrested him and he puts him in jail. And he's going to catch tuberculosis while he's in jail. There were dozens of Marines that had garrisoned around City Hall and the jail, and that meant that the mob could not lynch either John Arthur Bowen or Reuben Crandall. So because of this affair of John Arthur Bowen's alleged attempted murder and of old Frank Key putting Dr. Reuben Crandall in jail, the 1835 August snowstorm erupted, a.k.a. the Snow White Race Riots of 1835. The Snow White Race Riots would see the whites of D.C. erupt in violence to put down the abolitionists and the free blacks and to defend slavery. Schools, homes, brothels, and churches were trashed, burned, and people were attacked violently, especially free blacks. Beverly Snow is the black man, he's actually mixed race, who This race riot is named after the Snow White Race Riots of 1835 was named after Beverly Snow. And Beverly Snow was the wealthiest and most successful black man, since he's part white, in Washington, D.C. Beverly Snow was a free black who was extremely educated, wealthy, successful, and even a little bit snobbish. Beverly Snow had been born a slave in Lynchburg, Virginia, and he was granted his freedom when he came of age. Beverly Snow had learned the culinary arts at an early age, but clearly had more extraordinary skills, including social dexterity, entrepreneurial drive, and ambition. Beverly Snow came to Washington, D.C. to go into business for himself, and he opened one of Washington, D.C.'s first true restaurants in the early 1830s. Beverly Snow's restaurant was called the Epicurean Eating House, and it was located on the corner of 6th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue, and it was highly successful. Beverly Snow's finally appointed restaurant sat amid several busy hotels on Pennsylvania Avenue. By day, Beverly Snow served Washington's elite white families. At night, he offered parlors for gentlemen forming private parties. The newspaper ad that Beverly Snow ran that week declared that his menu included a fine green turtle, a very fine sheep's head, and every other luxury of the season. The Washington Mirror reported that Beverly Snow had used very indecent and disrespectful language concerning the wives and daughters of mechanics. Since the white mob wasn't able to get their hands on Dr. Reuben Crandall or John Arthur Bowen, they decided to target Beverly Snow and his Epicurean Eating House in D.C., especially since it was reported by the newspapers that he had talked badly about their wives and daughters. The first destination of the mob attack was Beverly Snow's Epicurean Eating House. What was once a very sophisticated and luxurious restaurant, the Epicurean Eating House, was ransacked to ruins by the mob in search of Snow because he was a free black owner, because he was successful, because he was an obvious and easy target. The white lynch mob searched for Beverly Snow, but they were unable to capture him. They were unable to find him and capture him, because on that August 11th, 1835 night, Beverly Snow was able to escape unharmed through the management of white friends. But the next day, the white lynch mob returned to Beverly Snow's Epicurean Eating House. The rioters, the Globe reported, cut down the restaurant sign and broke and destroyed most, if not all, the furniture in the house, not forgetting to crack a bottle of the old hock now and then. So they destroyed the restaurant and stole his whiskey, and of course got drunk on another person's whiskey. About 300 or 400 mechanics remained in and around Snow's restaurant until sometime in the night. Then the mechanics left the restaurant and headed toward the Reverend John F. Cook's church and school at the corner of 14th and 8th Streets. It was suspected that John Arthur Bowen had went to school at Reverend John F. Cook's school. Reverend John F. Cook was a solemn, free black man who was well-versed in Presbyterian theology and sought to educate every Negro child he could find. Like Dr. Reuben Crandall, John F. Cook was also against drinking alcohol. The white lynch mob attacked the school because Bowen was suspected of being taught of abolishing slavery at this school. The white lynch mob, the mechanics, went and destroyed John F. Cook's books and furniture and partially destroyed Reverend John F. Cook's building. The larger context of the attack on the school was the white working-class men's frustration over free blacks' ability to work and the resentment of black competition for jobs. The clear result was the unleashing of white terror against blacks. Before the mechanics could reach Reverend John F. Cook, he, too, retrieved his horse from a friend's stable and he fled to Pennsylvania. The riot continued for days in the state's capital. As night fell, roving bands of white men hunted for free blacks and abolitionists to molest. The mechanics then demolished several of the small houses that free blacks lived in. They also destroyed schools and broke the windows of one of their houses of worship, according to the National Intelligencer newspaper. In addition, a house of ill fame on Capitol Hill was torched around midnight. So they're burning down black people's houses, schools, churches. All of them were demolished. It was not until President Andrew Jackson intervened that the riot stopped. President Andrew Jackson was greeted with relief and the fanfare of a marching band. He immediately sent word to the mechanics saying that he hoped to address their grievances. Andrew Jackson hoped to address the white lynch mob, the mechanics' grievances. Washington, D.C.'s restrictive black codes were tightened in response to the incident. Beverly Snow, meanwhile, had gone to his hometown of Fredericksburg and turned himself in to the sheriff for his own protection. From his jail cell, Beverly Snow wrote a letter to the politically influential Globe. Beverly Snow denied that he had spoken badly about the mechanics' women, and he cited his stellar reputation in Washington. Sirs, do me the honor to look back at my past conduct as a citizen for the last 6 or 7 years, Beverly Snow wrote. If anything can be produced against me, let the world know it. When city authorities vouched that Snow was not wanted for any crime, Beverly Snow returned to Washington, dissolved his interest in the Epicurean eating house, and left town for a country where a man might live freely, Canada. In Canada, Beverly Snow started all over again in Toronto with another restaurant that was as popular as his Washington eatery.